Hi there. We are so glad that you're in the room. Welcome to our conversation tonight. We're going to be discussing relations, marriage, and sex. So I'm glad that you're here tonight, and I want you to know that we're in the room primarily because my mother, Lois Evans, had a desire to make sure that pastors' wives were supported, encouraged, equipped, but even more so that there was a safe place to have challenging conversations, or maybe conversations that for a pastor's wife there aren't other comfortable spots to have them. And so we wanted to make sure that we continue her passion to serve pastors' wives, but also to have those real conversations. And we look forward to that conversation tonight. Now, there was a time when there was a First Lady Conference every year, and that ran for a few years, about a decade. And as a part of that event, there was an after dark conversation. So we're getting back to those after dark conversations and talking about things we need to know. So we're glad that you're here. I want to first of all welcome our studio audience who are willing to be in the room. We all feel the palpitation of the moment. We're like, oh my God, what are we going to talk about? But I also want to welcome you if you're in our virtual audience. We are grateful that you set aside some time this evening to join us and to prayerfully be reminded that one, sex is normal, talking about sex is okay, and that you are helped in your life or maybe equipped to help someone else. And I especially want to welcome my guest who's joining me, Dr. Tina Scott. So now I got to tell you how Dr. Tina Scott ended up here in this conversation. So we had a pastors' wives retreat earlier this year, and we had a similar discussion, not just about sex, just about anything we needed to talk about. But sex came up, and some challenging questions about sex came up. And Dr. Tina's friend pushed her forward and said, girl, go help them.
Yes.
And she ended up on the side of the stage answering one question, and by the time the night was done, she was on the stage. We gave her a seat because she certainly had some amazing things to add to our conversation. So I know you're going to be blessed by having her here tonight as well. I just want to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Tina, and I'm going to look at my notes to make sure I don't miss anything. She is an accomplished psychotherapist, a best-selling author, a businesswoman, a thought leader coach, speaker, trainer. She's always had a passion for helping people, and God led her into this area of helping people after she left unexpectedly an area in the workforce. But he said, this is your time to do what you're called to do. She is a college professor, a certified coach, an approved clinical supervisor, licensed professional counselor. She specializes in breakups, self-esteem, loss, divorce, and independent living. But she is also a pastor's wife, married for 30 years, and also the proud mother of 3 children. So glad and excited to welcome Dr. Tina Scott tonight. So let me start out with this question. Why is this topic, sex and marriage, important to you?
It's important because I see so many couples struggling with it, and they would come into the room not knowing how to address the elephant in the room, and they would dance around it and not address it, and then winds up not staying together. So for me, it's like the glue to help relationships stay together and marriages to stay together. So that's why it's important to me.
I know, and somebody right now is like, oh gosh, why does it have to be the glue? we have different women who are watching tonight, I'm sure. There are some that are like, I don't want to do it. I don't enjoy it. Tell me how to kind of get over that, right? And then there are other women that are like, I can't get enough of it. He doesn't seem interested. So you always bring to this conversation people who have different experiences. But the beauty is that we're going to have a space tonight for everyone to be welcome at the table. Because listen, we had like over 80 questions. We're going to focus. We know what people want to talk about now, don't we? And so we're going to take about 20 of those tonight. But why do you think that in the Christian sphere that we're so adverse to talking about sex?
I think because of the way we were taught at a younger age that sex is bad, and to talk about it brings shame. So now we're in the Christian realm. It's like, oh, we can't do this. It's against all religious rules, and it's not so. And I think it's a taboo that sex is bad. So people don't want to talk about it.
And I think even when you know sex is good, you carry the habit of not talking about it into marriage, into marriage. Well, let's dig in.
Okay.
So let's start with some general relationship, because there's sex is about relationship. It's about intimacy, and a lot of times those issues of relationship find their way into the bedroom. But it wasn't about the bedroom; it was about the relationship before you got there. So when you're talking about pastors and pastors' wives and the marriage relationship, it gets interrupted and maybe even sometimes exhausted a lot by the church. It's always on. People always have a need. And that can lend itself to, I'm sure, people coming home and just being tired and not wanting to do any more of anything, even with the one that they love. What do you think are good boundaries for pastor and pastor's wife to have so that they have respite even from the church that they love and serve?
I think having a good schedule and sticking to it. Sometimes we'll have a schedule and like, oh, we can expand it, and 5 o'clock becomes 6 o'clock, then 6 o'clock becomes 7 o'clock, and then you have one of the spouses just struggling because they're missing the other one, right? So when we talk about boundaries, they're set up for a reason. It defines a line that you don't want anything or anyone to cross. And I think it's important that, too, talk about what those boundaries are. Set a schedule, stick to it. Every now and then emergencies happen, but when the emergencies become the
regular,
routine, then we have to say, hold up, and talk about what will happen if we don't set these boundaries. It's just not something fun to do. It's something that's really going to safeguard us as a family, as a couple.
That's good. That's so good. Okay, someone asked, how do I handle my negative Nancy spouse? Nothing I do is good enough. He never compliments me. We never celebrate anniversaries. It's been 36 years of this. Anything that's not related to ministry, to him is worldly, and he's not interested. So even if he's home, his mind is not on what's interesting or important to me. He's only about ministry, and I'm not happy in my relationship as a result.
That definitely sounds like a good source for therapy, first of all, because it sounds like there's a lot of underlying issues, right? But I think it's important that we communicate our needs and not just assume that they feel the same way that we're feeling. Because oftentimes everything becomes a routine and the conversation may start, but people aren't really listening. We're not listening. So I think starting a conversation, talking about how I'm feeling, when you do certain things, what it means to me, I feel neglected, and not be ashamed to say those things. Use those words. I feel neglected. I feel alone. I don't feel like you're paying me more attention than what you used to. Verbalize it, state it, assert it.
Now, this is going to come up again when we keep diving deeper. You see, we're in the shallow end. It's a zero entry pool. But you have, whether we're talking about whether or not you want to spend time with me, or how I feel about the intimacy in our relationship, where I know that you're going to have women who are watching, who are going to say, yeah, I've told him, he's not listening. And so let's just talk about that right here at the top. When you have tried to have those conversations, your spouse, maybe they listen, but they don't change. And so whether you're talking about your engagement and intimacy emotionally, mentally, or physically, and you have expressed, what do you do when it doesn't seem like they want to do anything about the needs that you shared?
Wow, that's a good question, and it's a real question. I think at some point, a real conversation has to take place, even if we said it 1,000 times. What are our goals for this relationship? Is our goals to get better? Is our goals just to stay where it is? Are you still vested? And really have real heart-to-heart conversation. And if you still feel like the other person isn't listening, sometimes you need a third party in to help mediate, because there's so much dysfunctions in a marriage that at some point, due to all this stuff, you're not hearing each other. And you can tell your mate, it's $1 million across the street, and they're like, yeah, right. And they're not listening because of all the unresolved stuff that's happening, that when you pull somebody else in, they may hear it that way. So I would say seek additional support, seek additional help, because at some point you do get frustrated and then you really start checking out.
It sounds like you're saying not to settle.
Nope.
If it's broken, fight for it.
Nope, I don't think you should. I think what happens is when we start settling, we start getting into a rut and it just goes deeper and deeper. Then we start feeling lonely, depressed. And the things just keep compiling, and it just seems like there's no hope when there really is some hope. So I think movement is good, good movement and say, hey, we tried this ourselves. Now I'm just going to see who I can bring in that I can trust to help us get through this.
What do you do though when you're the pastor's wife, senior pastor's wife, associate, whatever, and bringing in someone you can trust seems like a really big thing. You have your circle of influence, and maybe outside of the church, there are people in the community, but they know who you are. So, what do you do when you want to protect your own privacy,
Yeah.
your husband's privacy, but you want to bring in a third party? How do you do that, but also not put yourself in a compromising position as the leaders in your church?
That's real. Because most of the time when we're hurting, it could be after dark, like how we're talking after dark now.
Yeah.
And really professional help is probably not at your fingertips. And it's easy to pick up that phone and say, girl, da, 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 da. But we have to use wisdom, right? Because when we spit it out, it's going to probably come back in a way that's not beneficial to us. Because sometimes when people hear what we have to unload, they can't wait. Because they feel like they can share it with other, or they may say, hey, let's pray about it. You know, pastor and so is da 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 da. So it's really important that you get professional help, because with professional help, we are sworn by confidentiality. We can't share any of your business, no matter how juicy it is, right? We can't share it because we have to respect your privacy. Everyone doesn't have to respect your privacy, but professionals do. So I say seek professional help and find a clinician or a therapist or support that aligns up with what you're struggling with, because all of us specialize in different things. And it's important to find that one, but please don't hold it in, because you probably tried sharing it with somebody and you found it blasted everywhere. And then too, sometimes when, as being a senior pastor, people are looking at maybe having something on you, and we don't want that.
But I love that idea that even though I, as a pastor's wife, my husband as a pastor's husband, may be conscious of someone that is in the same town, knowing my business, if they're a professional, they have a code of conduct that they have to adhere to. So there's a little bit of safety there.
Yes.
Okay, so when we talk about the disappointment that a wife may feel if she's shared, and because this question specifically did come up, how do I move on from the disappointment in our relationship? You mentioned therapy, but the feeling of feeling like I'm settling, or that everything in my life is geared towards pleasing my husband and I'm not getting anything out of it. So even if I'm working on it, even if I'm making moves to have conversations, seek my own therapy, but I am struggling where I am, what would you say to the wife who's working through it, but still struggling, still, and you've been there, we've all been there, where you just are doing everything you can and it's still taking everything you have to get through the day?
No, I get it. I get it. I
What
think
encouragement would you give to her?
I think first I would look at the expectations that the wife is putting on their husband, because oftentimes I see that the expectation is that I want you to make me completely happy. I want you to take care of all my needs, and we're not willing to take care of our needs ourselves, if that makes sense. Meaning that if we're not taking care of ourselves and fulfilling the voids that we see within ourselves that probably was there before the marriage, I would just say take a step back and look at the expectations that we're putting on our husbands or your husband. And then at that point, if you still feel like your needs are not met, I would also challenge, how are you articulating it to your husband? Are you saying it in a way that he's understanding? And hear me when I say this. I know I'm talking about us as a wife, what we could do by answering that question, but I am not saying
It's all on you.
it's all on
Right.
you. I'm just saying if I was to have that conversation, I would start there.
Because the only thing you can control is you.
Right. I would start there, but I know different conversations that I have, and I hear that, well, I'm not just the problem. But I believe if we start with ourselves and really start looking at solutions and not just keep zoning in on what's not going right, because I do believe there's a lot that's going right. And if we allow ourselves to really focus on some of those positive things, that's going to bring more positive energy, and it will help overshadow a lot of the negative. So when we focus on the negative, we're more solution focused, more so than like being frustrated and angry.
So what I hear you saying is, if I'm working on it, it's not where I want it to be, I'm still feeling overwhelmed by it. See what fulfillment I have the power to give to myself, or that the Lord has empowered me to give to myself,
Yes.
and not look for all that from my husband.
Yes.
And also look for something good.
Yes.
Be
yes.
thankful, be grateful, look for the positive.
Yes.
That'll help.
And then just use our words too. Because I think oftentimes we feel that our husbands are mind readers. And who we used to be like 5 years ago, we shifted and we changed. And they probably are reading the mind from 5 years ago and probably implementing those things. But we have to be courageous enough to articulate what it is that we need, and not in anger.
Yeah.
Because in anger, it's
We
like
can articulate
static.
then, can't we?
Yes. Yes. Ooh, we can articulate that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I heard a minister say one time, God is the only one who can put you together with the person that you're supposed to be married to, knowing who you need now and who you are now and who you will need later because of who you are later.
Yes.
Because both of you are growing and changing and over time. And so we have to give ourselves grace to communicate, which I know you started with therapy and you're always going to come back to therapy. You're a therapist too. Because sometimes we don't have the words, and it's by talking to trusted counselors that we gain the words to express what our needs are. Because sometimes we don't know. We're just mad that they're not doing it. So that's super helpful.
Yes. And that's our easy go-to is anger. If you look at all the emotions, all the feelings that we can possibly have, we start there. And it's almost, we're imitating what we've seen done throughout our life, right? So anger is not the only emotion that we have. But I think it's the noise, the frustration that gets attention. But really, it's like Charlie Brown, it's want, because it's just too loud. So anger is not the only emotion and go-to for us. We can actually communicate it in a loving way and just assert ourselves and be serious about it when we talk about those boundaries earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, you're making me think, because isn't anger like a secondary emotion of sadness? Yeah.
It's underlining.
It's an underline. Yeah. So I'm sad I'm not getting what I want from my husband, so I get angry. Okay, couple other questions just to lay the foundation for relationship. Physical, emotional, and verbal abuse are a part of our past. Through counseling and therapy, that has all changed. But, and I'm going to add this phrase, I'm still triggered. She says, how do I manage my hypersensitivity to conflict now?
I think identifying what your triggers are. If you identify that certain things are still coming up, identify them and talk about them. Hey, I noticed that when you did this, it made me feel like this, and I'm not sure how to handle it. Because when we're triggered, sometimes we don't really know how to get unstuck from that, and we go back again to the anger, being frustrated and mad, and then bringing back everything that we said we forgave and forgot about.
Comes right back.
It comes right back. It's like it happened just yesterday.
Okay, that's good. Now, last one. I feel that there might be infidelity happening. I don't have proof. What do I do?
So when we talk about infidelity,
Hire a private investigator. Log into his phone with your iCloud. I'm just kidding. Y'all stop me. Stop me now.
But I've seen it done. People hire a PI, but it becomes an obsession.
Yeah.
And the obsession is to see what you're doing, even when you already see that it's happening. It just keeps going and keeps going. And what happens is we're not being solution focused, like trying to really fix the problem. Now we're obsessed with catching you in the act, you doing this or you're doing that. And I think at some point, we have to have real heart-to-heart conversation and just really talk about it. Am I what you want? And if I'm not, what are we missing? How can we heal from this? How can we move forward from this? And really have conversation that's not making either one feel uncomfortable and feeling attacked. And you may say, well, infidelity, you should feel that way. But we want to get to the root of it. And we want to figure out how we can move on, because that's a real stuck point.
Life 360. Sorry. All right, here we go. Let's go on into the deep end. Okay, what are your top 5 tips to keeping a vibrant sex life in marriage?
I would say, don't feel like it's a certain way that it has to be done. And don't feel like sex just has to start in the bedroom. Identify those ways, the foreplay that can happen before you even get into the bedroom, meaning push that vacuum cleaner. That's a turn on for me. Or whatever. and really like communicate what you like and not be ashamed about it. Verbalize, hey, I like this, I like that. I think too often we don't communicate. And when we don't communicate, we're stuck in a space that sex is happening, but it's not joyful sex. It's not magical. And I think in order for that to happen, we have to make sure we're open and we communicate it.
That's a part of that good girl thing where I can talk about what I like. You got it. Some of us have to shed that. Okay, so are there any Christian clean resources you would recommend for women to educate themselves? Because Lord knows people can search my Chrome history. They'll know what I was researching. Or if I order that book and it comes to my door, I pray to God it doesn't go to my neighbor's house. Where can we go to get educated about not just the philosophical parts of marriage and sex, but the practical parts of marriage and sex?
Well, definitely there are a lot of books on Amazon that I refer to my clients. But also, too, if you are in that therapy space and you have a Christian counselor, they'll actually refer plenty of resources to you as well. But I tell my my clients as far as like, podcasts and different things like that. So I share a list with them, and I know we're going to share additional resources later that you can really look up because they are there.
They are there. But you do have to look.
You have.
You do have to look. You might need the privacy cover on your phone, but you can look.
But you know what? I like the fact that you said you have to look.
You have to look.
But many of us don't want to look because we're afraid of who's looking at us while we're looking.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what are you getting that book for? And you know, remember back in the day we would cover our books?
The book covers for school.
When you're purchasing it, it's no cover on. And I think a lot of our resources are right at our fingertips, but we're afraid to touch them because we're afraid of who's looking at us. But it's healing in that, and it helps us to get unstuck in some of those areas.
Okay, let's talk about scheduling sex. You talked about schedules earlier, and just in terms of setting boundaries on church and work and all of that, so you're protecting your time. But the flip side of that is scheduling sex, because maybe one party is like, I don't want the random midnight calls, but also the other part is I want to know that at least twice a week, 3 times a week, I get some.
Right.
So what are your thoughts about that, and how does that affect the romance in the marriage, the spontaneity in the marriage? Is that a bad thing?
No, I don't think it's a bad thing because we're being intentional about the time that we spend together. And when we schedule it, we know this is our time. We set the boundaries. And that doesn't stop us from being on the spot with having sex anytime we want to. But at least we know this is our time and we're not letting anything or anybody come in the way of it. And we could take turns. Like if it's every Thursday, maybe one Thursday I'll take the time to like set the atmosphere. Then the next Thursday you can set the atmosphere. But there's nothing wrong with scheduling time because we're being very intentional.
Okay. Nothing wrong with scheduling sex. Okay. So normally we talk about the man's sex drive and how it's higher than a woman's and how she can keep up with that. But this listener said, what can I do if he never pursues sexual intimacy with me? My sex drive is higher than his. And so many times my needs go unmet and I'm not sure what to do.
I wonder if he knows that her needs go unmet. Because too often we fake that as if they are being met. And I would say open communication. Communicate that my needs are not being met and what those needs are.
How can you communicate that, though, to a man without making him feel that he's not meeting your needs? That's a big deal for men to know that they're taking care of you. So how do you communicate that in a way that states that you have needs without making him feel like he's not measuring up to meeting them?
I think it's in the tone and the way that we say it. And I guess me understanding the question, it sounds like his needs are getting met, but her needs are not getting met.
This one, her needs are not getting met.
Okay.
She's saying my drive is higher than his.
Okay.
So he wants to do it once a week. I want to do it 4.
I wonder why he doesn't want to do it more. And wondering if it's some underlying issues. And that's where conversation comes in. Like, why are we only doing it once a week? And he may say, well, I don't really feel like doing it anymore. But really understanding the why, if that makes sense. Why can't we do it more? And if she says she needs it more than what he's actually giving her, then again, that conversation will pull out, like, what's hindering it.
but.
I knew you was going to get, I knew she was going to do, that's why I was looking at her. I said, she's getting ready to do the but.
Like, but is it possible that in a marriage, without anything being wrong, just by design, two people can have different levels of drive?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
So if we have different levels of drive, and in this case, he wants less and she wants more, is there a point where even after discussion, you just have to agree, compromise, and that may mean discomfort or sacrifice for one or the other party?
I would think that there's an opportunity to meet somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
If two people are really honest about why there's a lack of interest, and I've heard so many different things in the bedroom that stop one from being more interested, whether it's different things that's going on, different tension that they may have. Once we weed out a lot of that stuff, I think there's an in the middle space for that. Even if her sex drive is higher than his, there's a way that we can meet in the middle.
Okay. Because inquiring minds want to know. So let's talk about this. We've got sex drives that are different, but then we have marriages with no sex. So one of the questions that we had is, I am in a sexless marriage. I don't know how I stumbled upon this on YouTube. I was looking at TED Talks and I was sharing this with someone. There's a TED Talk on YouTube that has 33 million views. And it's the title is Sexless Marriages. And I had no idea this was a big deal, but just based on those views. So what do you do if you're in a sexless marriage? I mean, is it just the same? You're just talking about it? Or what are you doing if, again, you've talked about it and he's just not with it?
You know what? If we're saying we're in a sexless marriage.
Sexless, like we are sleeping in the same bed or not, but we're just not being intimate really ever.
So then I want to use another word. It sounds like we're in a tension marriage too, meaning that there's something else going on, especially if y'all were having a lot of sex previous. Something happened. And I think addressing the elephant in the room, like what happened, meaning where are we disconnecting at? Because the disconnection happened way before the sex stopped. Meaning that, did I ask, and again, this is me not making it seem like it's all the woman's fault, but I'm just coming from this perspective. Is there some things that we could not agree on and it's still up in the air? And those things are causing some space in our relationship, meaning that I asked you about your spending, you keep spending. I asked you to do certain things, the way you talk to me, the way this, and the list can go on. But what is going on to create the sexless marriage? Like what's happening? And really, again, we'd say talk about it, but talking is key because talking allows for us to get what's going on the inside out. And then when we actually have those real conversations and courageous enough about it, then we'll start hearing some things and hopefully two people are coming together with the goal to have a solution and not to keep fighting. Because that's a sign that there's something else, there's other things brewing.
Even if the tension is low, because like what I hear you saying is there's something we got to go back to where something got broken, we have to fix it. But from a lot of things I've read and that even when I watched that one video, people, when you were talking about people settling into routine, that can become a routine. It's just, we just are used to this. But you're still saying, even if I'm fine, he's over there, or we stop sleeping in the same bedroom because he snores too loud, at some juncture, you're like, it is, as you said earlier, sex is glued to a marriage, and if it's not happening, something is wrong.
It's something
Your
going
assumption
on.
would be that something is always wrong.
If you have two people that love each other, and you have two people that value intimacy, but then you have two people that cannot handle conflict, at some point, that's the elephant that comes into the room. That space is now being clogged in with all these different things. So I am definitely saying that there's some things that need to be talked about. The minute that two people start, and this is going to take us somewhere totally different, so I want to try to stay focused. The minute you start seeing some negative shifts in your relationship, I think we need to address them because then it becomes bigger. And I see a lot of people in my room that they sleep in different rooms and they didn't want to. It just happened. And what happens is one is starting to feel lonely and starting to feel rejected. And then when the other one comes closer to them, they're starting to feel like, now I don't want to be bothered. It's like a constant, chase. And I definitely feel there's some underlying issues when the sex stop. It could even be that one is struggling with being able to maintain the sexual act. So instead of addressing it, I'm just going to go in a whole different space and we're not even going to deal with it. But it leaves one feeling, are you still attracted to me? Do you still desire me? And they may say, yeah, but they may not be really willing to deal with not being able to be prepared for the task.
Well, let's talk about that. Attraction. People grow, people change, age happens, weight happens. What if you dig into it to discover whatever broke the glue, whatever made the glue less adhesive, and you find out something in that conversation that's hurtful to him or hurtful to you? So like the example that you gave, maybe he's not able to maintain the act, and so he's just not in the room, or maybe he's not attracted to her and he doesn't want to sleep with her. So to have that conversation means she has to tell him, or he has to say, admit again to, yeah, I'm just struggling to do that because no man wants to do that. Or maybe she has to be prepared to hear from him, I'm not attracted to you anymore. If that conversation brings you to a really hard place, which is why we're avoiding it in the first place, what do I do if I don't really want to hear that? He doesn't want to hear this. We don't really want to talk about it. It brings us to the place where it's hurtful to hear he's not attracted to me, or it's hurtful for him to hear that that I'm aware that he's struggling. What do you do with that in that moment? Because I think since we're shying away from it, what do you do when you get there?
When you get to the point that
You're saying hard things and having to deal with those topics that you really didn't want to deal with in the first place, and that there's no immediate solution for. Because if he tells me he's not in the room with me because he's not attracted to me, I don't know what to do with that tonight. You know what I'm saying?
I definitely think that's a hard pill to swallow. And I'm going to just take this away from the question just
Yes,
for a second and
please
bring
do.
it back to me. I know sometimes I'll walk past a mirror in my room and I'm like, what is happening? Like I see hair going one way, toenails looking another way. And then I'm expecting my husband to still see me as attractive. When even when I look through the mirror, I'm like, ooh, I look rough. And then if he was to say something to me, then I may take offense when I already know it's true. So I think it's important. It comes a time that we have to own our stuff and know that I let myself go, whether it's because I'm doing too much laundry, whether I'm running everything in this house and I'm forgetting to take care of myself. We just got to be real with it. And then there comes a time that we have to push the pause button and say, you know what, I have to make time for me. And it's not just really just for the sex, but it's for us to really show up for ourselves, right? It's the hair, the nails, that makes a big difference, because what we're saying is that I'm intentionally making time for me. And if you're intentionally making time for yourself, then it allows you to be opened up to do even more other things. So when you talk about having those courageous, tough conversations, they need to be had. But as long as we're doing it, whoever is saying it in a loving way, not in a way to like break down our spouse. Like, man, I remember when we used to swing through the chandeliers.
Oh,
I'm trying
Lord
to,
Jesus.
I'm trying to like, but I remember we used to do that. And then one may say, yeah, we used to,
Yeah.
but we were different sizes then, right?
That chandelier would come right
That
out of the
chandelier-
ceiling.
We may have to meet that chandelier on the floor. But realizing that there's some things about our own selves that we want to change. So if our mate says that to us, they're not really saying anything different than what we already identified ourselves. It's just that we weren't intentional enough to make the time to make it happen, right? And I would like to believe that we all married someone that we loved. And we would like to believe that they love us back. And we would like to believe that when they communicate, they're really trying to say something because it's something that they're missing. And that conversation will help us like just readjust, realign, so we can get our groove back. And since we're talking about sex, we're talking about our sexual groove. I get people that come into my office and say my mate smells. And it may not be because of actual not washing, but it could be what we're eating. Because we're trying to be healthy, right? So now I'm eating 10 capsules of garlic. And now I'm trying to connect with you.
And he's like, you smell like spaghetti.
Yes.
I don't want to make love to spaghetti.
But it's like things like that and being able to have those conversations. But I think if we say it in a way that's condemning, it's really hard for someone to bounce back from that. And it's really hard for us to really take note to say, hey, this is something that we can change and work through. So again, it's not a finger pointing thing, but I think for us to own our stuff, like if we see something in us that can be different, then let's change it. And then let's just talk about it. Like, these are the things that I like, and I want them back. And I believe that we can never talk too much.
Well, I was just thinking as you said that, you know, the talking for many women is not the challenge. We can talk. For men, however, getting them to have the conversation, which I know is one of the reasons why therapy can be so important, but even trying to encourage your mate, your spouse to go with you to therapy, his willingness to go, his willingness to open up, his willingness to share even some of the private things that may be going on with him that affect the sex life that they're going to see the therapist about. What can a wife do to encourage her husband to have some of these difficult, sensitive conversations, or when he really doesn't want to talk, or he is a man of few words, or he is very uncomfortable in these conversations? What is a wife to do when she's willing to talk, but he's, I wouldn't even say unwilling, just not talking?
Well, you know, sometimes we have couples that one's an introvert and one's an extrovert, right? But at some point they were talking.
Because or else how'd they end up here?
That's why they wind up coming together. At one point there was conversation happening. And it may sound repetitive, but it's like, what happened to stop the communication? What is the why? Why don't you want to talk to me? Why can't we have these conversations? And I see that in the therapy room, and the comments are, when I do talk, you shut me down. When I do say something, you act like it's irrelevant. It's on both sides. So actually setting the stage and allowing both people to just put their cards on the table and just see how we're going to move forward. But men want to talk. But if we're shutting them down and not allowing them the space to get it out, even if it's just one time, sometimes they hold on to it and say, oh, I'm never going to talk again. I'm never going to do this again. And it's really unfair. But I think if we have professional help, and again, I know I'm putting that therapy plug in, but sometimes it's necessary. Most of the time it's necessary when the communication stops. When there's no communication, when you feel like you're doing, after you've done all you can, and we talk about staying, bring them into therapy as well, right? And I find that men come into therapy, but they have their list too. And then they open up and they're being vulnerable. But the minute that either one allow their vulnerability to surface and they're feeling shamed or put down, they just close right back up.
Okay, menopause. My body is changing. This question says, my mind is willing, but my body is not cooperative. Or sometimes both are not cooperative. So do you have any tips on navigating sex for women during the season where your body is changing?
Yeah, that's when you really have to connect with your GYN, because definitely things are changing. One minute we're hot, one minute we're cold, one minute we want to be touched, one minute we don't. And I think when we really sit down and talk with our GYN and talk about the symptoms that we're having, they help us navigate through that. And also communicate into your mate that, you know, I don't want to be touched, or I'm going through something I can't explain. I think about when I went through menopause, I didn't realize what I was going through, but I know I was going through something. And it's beyond the hot flashes, the cold flashes. It's about really feeling like a woman, meaning that there's certain things that I desire, but then my body just started doing so many different things on me. So I think having the space to talk about it with a professional that may help you with different, if it's estrogen or whatever it is that you're lacking, I think it's a starting point to it all.
So go see your doctor and get some help.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And if you, I know one of the things that I've learned too is you don't have to wait until you're in menopause to get ready for menopause.
You don't.
You know, you could be in your early 40s and start having those conversations with your doctor about what am I looking for? How can I prepare? Getting tested so it doesn't happen at this magical age for everybody. It could be a little early or a little late. Because I think some people get caught off guard because they're looking for it to happen at a certain time.
Yep.
And then they don't recognize the signs because they weren't looking for it. So I think that's important too. Okay. My husband confessed his addiction to pornography. What do I do now?
So when we talk about addictions, we definitely need to get help. That's something that in the professional realm that we can walk through the whole process of what that addiction is, where it started from, and how we can just navigate it to get to healthy endings.
So he needs help. Again, see, this is sounding really good. I can tell my husband about a bunch of stuff. Okay, for this question, you need help. For this question, you need help. For this question, you need help. No, I'm just kidding. But I think, embedded there too is what do I do? Because him having help for that addiction is one part of the equation. But him having help, the two of us having help, me having help to recover from the discovery that he has this addiction and all of the things that come with that. Well, let me start with this. If you discover that your husband has a problem with pornography, what is the first thing you would do?
I would definitely have a conversation about it and be supportive and really understand, like,
Give me an example. Give me words, because what I heard in my head is not what you were saying. What I heard in my head was, oh my gosh, are you watching this? What I see in my head is going back through the history and seeing all the things I could find, except, private windows are a thing. I mean, I see the angst with it.
Right.
So, tell me what it looks like to have that first conversation where I realize he's struggling with pornography and he may not know that I know.
So meaning that you caught him watching pornography.
Let's just say that, because you're wanting me to be supportive, but if I catch somebody doing something that I don't want them to do, I prayed to God that they would never do, and then I can't believe they're actually doing, supportive isn't my first.
Of course. And you know what? You're absolutely right. But really understanding, like, what's going on here? Why are we here? And having that
So
conversation.
literally that's what I'm saying. Hey, I realize that you are.
Hey, I realize that you're watching porn, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, what's happening? Am I not pleasing you? Am I not satisfying you? What's going on? And he may come out and say, this has been something I just struggled with, because we said it was an addiction. So that means it's something that he's already been struggling with, and she's catching him. And it allows him the space. Of course, he's probably going to feel embarrassed and shame, and they both are going to feel uncomfortable. But expressing how you feel, like, I'm feeling hurt because I feel at this moment that I'm not all you need. And then it'll allow for a dialogue to happen, some conversation to happen.
What if my concern, what if my concern has nothing to do, because I do think that's the first thing. What does that mean about me? But I think especially when you're dealing with ministry, a first concern may be like, oh my gosh, you're a pastor. You're leading all of these people. And I may not even first be thinking about myself. I may be thinking about, oh my gosh, if somebody finds out about this, we are toast. So if that's my first thought, how would I be supportive if focusing on myself and my pleasure, you being pleased with me, is not actually my first concern?
I would think the next step is, how can we get help? How can we get through this? What needs to happen? What does our next step need to be? And discuss what that step needs to be. Because if we're worried more about it getting out,
It says something about us, doesn't it?
yeah. And that's the thing. I think if we're real with ourselves, if that's the main concern, we have other issues that we need to address. But let's just say that is it. then let's talk about what the solution is. We got to get help, and we got to do this together. And if we don't want this to get out, now we're vowing that we're gonna vow to work through this so it can stop, so we can deal with it, address it, move on, heal, forgive, and just keep moving forward.
But I love how you said in there, we're going to work on this together. And I think one of the things that we can do in marriage, particularly with sex, is look at your problem, my problem, you know, and you got to fix your problem. That's not my problem. That's your problem. But just the unity in marriage, and saying, what can I do to help? What can we do to get through this? I love that.
And you know, when you say unity, I think most of what we talked about tonight, it embellished unity. And if we're saying we are at a dynamic two, how can we get through whatever comes our way? What's missing on whatever problem that we're struggling with? Because just I think about when I make cakes. And I remember one time I was making a pound cake, and I put all the ingredients in. And I looked at my pound cake, and it was just flat. And then I looked to the right of my kitchen, and it was 8 eggs over there. And I did not put the eggs in. But I was able to identify what I was missing, so that the next time I go in and make that cake, I know what I need to make sure I put in. And even if that means I have to scan my kitchen, it's the same thing in our relationship. If we really sit down and identify what's missing in that trial and tribulation that we have, when it comes up again, it allows us to be more prepared to address it.
That's good. We were talking about sexless marriages, and one of the things that we were talking about is approaching that. And even in porn, like, am I pleasing you? And I know we've talked before we started this recording about wanting to be careful about how much responsibility, because it's always a woman to figure everything out.
Right.
One of the things that came up was just his pleasure in her, whether it's her weight or whether it's her smell or whatever. But we all go through changes, right? And so often, and we see this, a woman is going to be challenged for how she keeps her body, but her husband may not be keeping his, but he has expectations for her that he's not even maintaining. And that can be very hurtful. When you are faced with that dynamic, whatever the result is, whether it's resulting in porn or resulting in a sexless marriage or resulting in negativity, obviously, I think a husband holding his wife to a standard that he's not holding for himself, that already speaks to his willingness to be on even ground about the conversation. So what am I to do as a wife when our sex life isn't great, he's down on me because of my body, and maybe some of these changes are about the changes of seasons and not so much about the changes in what I'm actually eating every day? What am I doing mentally, emotionally, to maintain some level of peace, calm, and confidence about me being loved as a daughter of the Lord when his actions towards me are saying something different and I live with him every day?
Wow, that's a real good question. And it sounds like he's aware of it and he doesn't want to change.
That's what it sounds like. Yeah. And I'm hurting. He's not sleeping with me. He's watching porn, or he's negative and just constantly saying, you're going to go out like that or whatever. And I am desirous of my husband. I want to be healthy. I want to please him. But I'm also just going through a change in my life. My body's going through changes, and it is hurtful to me. What am I doing every day to keep a sense of stability about myself?
It definitely sounds like this individual's self-esteem is low. And at some point, we have to throw out the lifeguard for ourselves, right? Meaning getting some one-on-one therapy to really feelings. How can I handle my feelings? Because my husband isn't handling my feelings. How can I breathe? Because it sounds like this person is not breathing. So I would recommend really sitting with someone one-on-one. And in that room, while I'm sitting with that person one-on-one, really start pulling back those layers of the hurt and the pain. And to your point, we still didn't fix the problem of her husband. Her husband not paying her attention, her husband not loving her, her husband not acknowledging her in those ways. But what it sounds like is this person is not breathing right now. And the CPR for that person is getting them to a place that somebody actually hears them. And when they are being heard, it will allow them to think differently and move differently as an individual, and also how they actually viewing themselves in their marriage. But it's definitely a lot of breakdowns there. And I know we're live. I know that it's a lot of women struggling with that in a marriage and not being heard. But I think they need to get to a place to start where they are being heard. And then I think it will help facilitate a lot more movement, because this person sounds like they're actually being stuck and staying still. And we need them to get moving again so that they can start moving in spaces that are healthier, that will allow them to actually heal at some point.
I think so much is defined in marriage by these certain boxes, and sex is one of those boxes. But we are beautifully crafted, wonderfully designed creatures, and that is one part of our life, you know. And so when you talked about her being stuck, I was just thinking about how important it is, as a woman. You even said earlier that it's not your husband's job to fulfill all of your needs. That when there is one part of your life you can't fix, or one part of your life that's painful, that we still have a lot of power to agree with God about who He made us to be, about what our gifts and talents are, what we enjoy, and to place value in those things, spending time in those things, or finding not to spend less time with your husband, but it's okay to spend some time with some friends who are affirming you, who are saying things to you that help to remind you that you're okay if you're living in a situation where you're constantly feeling like you're not. I think we have to take responsibility for that too.
I think you hit on a good point. Sometimes we stop living, and to really understand it's okay for us to even have a life outside of being a pastor's wife, to have a life with our friends, to actually come around people that love us. I think that's so key, because we often cut that off with all the responsibilities.
That's so good. So good. So many things. Okay. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. For 6 months, we've had zero intimacy. So we had sexless marriages for a few years now. We got 6 months, but I have told him how sad this makes me, but there still hasn't been any change. So I went and got myself a toy. Is masturbation wrong in these scenarios? Signed, I have needs, 3 exclamation points.
Yeah, we diving deep. But what goes on in a bedroom and two people agree on it is not for us to judge it. And if it's acceptable in the relationship, then it's not for us to tell a couple what to do and what not to do. So I guess your question is, if two people are agreeing, the husband and wife.
Now, she didn't say that. She said, just to be clear, I have started using a toy. She did not say we, but what I hear you saying is the we matters in that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's a whole lot. And if the we is, this is fine, then it's fine. And if it's not, then it's definitely going into a whole nother category.
Yeah. Ooh, Jesus. Okay. Infidelity has happened, so we're still together. How does a couple kindle emotional connection after infidelity has been present? How do I stop my mind from replaying the hurt over and over again? So there's 2 questions there. Emotional connection has been broken because of infidelity. So how do I rebuild connection, and how do I stop replaying the hurt?
Okay, that comes from trust. We have to rebuild the trust and really start working on the relationship from the ground up, and just getting back to a safe and stable place. Because infidelity left one feeling wounded. And normally the person that didn't get wounded can heal easily. But the person that has been wounded is just sitting there like, how can I reconnect with you? And it's really having those tough conversations again. And then being able to rebuild that trust that was lost. I have heard it often said
in marriages where infidelity has been a part, that he is willing to do anything to get me back to a point, or there'll be a certain amount of time. And if I'm still struggling, that I've thinking about one specific friend of mine who is just saying, I'm still hurt, I'm still triggered, I'm working on it, I'm trying. We're doing counseling, and he was so ready initially to do whatever it took. And the longer it has taken me to really relax into my trust for him, the more frustrated he's gotten. Because he's like, how long do I have to do all of this? Like, how long is it going to take you to trust me again? So he started in the right place, but he's running out of patience for the time I need to heal. What would you say to her?
I see this often, that when the one that was hurt and the other one is rushing it. But bringing the awareness, and I know you mentioned her, but I want to talk about both. Bringing the awareness why she's hurt. She didn't just wake up being hurt. She's woke and hurt because of what happened. And what I would say to her is that there's a stuck point that we get to. And where are you getting stuck? And often I find that when I talk to the female or the male, that the images, they can't get out their head. They keep replaying it over and over. And after they replay it, they start blaming themselves that I wasn't enough or I didn't do this enough. So I would really try to figure out what her stuck point is. And wherever her stuck point is, to help her like talk through it, get through it, so we can navigate some healing in this journey.
So what practical tips do you have for the lessening of the replaying?
When you say the lessening of the replay.
It's just coming to me. I just keep seeing them together, whether I caught them or whether I imagined them together. It's in my head. I don't want to have that in my head because every time it's in my head, it's triggering to me. But how do I stop those images from arriving in my frontal lobe?
You know, that's a hard one. And it's a process, it's a journey, right? So when those images are coming to her head, I ask, what are you doing when they come? What are you doing at that moment? Are you and are we feeding it more because of our pain and we feel like that's where we belong, right? Or are we allowing ourselves to realize that the negative talk that you're giving to yourself, whether you're blaming yourself or not, but what are you feeding yourself at that point? And whatever it is that's going there, how can we challenge it and bring it back into a different direction?
Do you think this is fair? That's a great question. What am I doing? And what if I'm not doing anything except, okay, I personally, this is not a concern of mine, but I find myself wondering. I joked about Life 360. We have Life 360 as a family so we can tell who's where at any given time. If my husband turns his Life 360 off, I'm like, what are you doing? And it's not about it. And I'm not thinking infidelity. I'll be thinking, he loves shopping at a pawn shop, or he driving through fried chicken. He probably doesn't want me to know those two things, but I'm thinking,
Right.
what are you doing? And so when you said that, I was thinking, is it fair if my husband has had an affair and you ask me as my therapist or as my friend, what's happening when this is happening? Well, what's happening is I don't know where he is. Or he said he would be somewhere and he's not. Or he said he would call and he hasn't. So in that gap, then my mind starts racing. Would it be fair then for me tactically to say to my husband, hey, I'm realizing every time I start struggling, it's because I haven't heard from you. It would help me if, I don't know, on your way home from work, you just called me to let me know that you're on your way home so I know what to expect. Is that a fair request to identify how he can help me through those gaps if that's my triggering moment?
And I think when we talk about communicating how he can help. And when you identify that this is a trigger for you, explain it to him what exactly it is that you need. So if you're saying when you're traveling from home to work, it will help me if you call. I think that's an awesome request and it's reasonable.
Which means I have to know.
Yes.
I have to know so I can communicate that to him. One of the things I think that's challenging about sex is the communication. If we're not comfortable communicating, but it's also knowing what to communicate. We were talking, and you gave the percentage. We always tend to assume culturally that men enjoy sex more than women. But I think that there are questions that women are not asking. Why am I not enjoying sex as much as he is? Or they've just come to accept men are supposed to enjoy it more than I am. But knowing what could help you enjoy it and then communicating that to your spouse, that's the work of figuring that out. So if I don't enjoy sex, let's just assume that the woman is not enjoying sex and she doesn't know why. How can you even begin to discover if you don't know, if you don't enjoy it and you don't know how to enjoy it? How do you even figure out? I mean, because going on Facebook and asking, so I don't enjoy sex, can anybody help me out? It's probably not what this crowd of women is going to do. So how do I even begin to discover so that I can communicate what it is that would help me to enjoy physical intimacy with my husband?
So one of the things that I do with couples when they don't even know where to begin, I ask them to come together and not with the intention of sex. And we call it sensei touching, meaning that y'all just start exploring each other's bodies. And when you're exploring each other's bodies, there's certain spaces and places that you are touched. And you're like, no, that's right. And then there's another space that you're like, no, don't do that. And really spending time together, understanding what the other person like without the intention of sex. To really understand and start exploring each other's body, right?
She's nervous up here. I just feel nervous. She's like, I can't do that. Why does that make us feel this way? Because I felt the temperature rise in the room. Why is that exercise, as simple as it sounds, why does it make us feel uncomfortable?
You know what? Because I think the comfortability comes with the sexual act within itself in the mind, right? But it allows for us to be intimate with each other. And I think sometimes we skip that piece of intimacy. Us just coming together, enjoying and exploring each other, and not have any other goal but just satisfying each other. And sex is not the goal. When we are into each other and we're being intimate, we find out a lot more about each other. And I know we were talking earlier, when we talk about orgasms and we're talking about intimacy, 20% of women have orgasms. The 80% are sitting there trying to figure out, like, what is that feeling?
Because they can't, or because they don't know how? They don't know
Because they
their
don't know
bodies?
how. They don't know. And there's a shame when we start to explore. And whatever our narrative is around sex or about sex, and we talked about being a good girl. So when we're thinking the good girl piece, it's like, oh, I don't want to do too much because from my understanding and what I was taught, good girls don't do certain things. But we're married, and it gives us the right to be able to explore each other's bodies.
What was that again? Sensei?
Sensei touch.
Sensei
And that's
touch.
where you touch without having the goal of sex. I'm not saying never, but during that hour.
Okay, can a man do that without? I'm so sorry. I'm trying to hold a straight face. I'm trying to have a straight face. Can a man do that without being frustrated?
Here it is. It's for a
He'd be like, "Do you want me to sit here and look at you and touch you in all the cracks and crevices and not do anything about it?" I'm serious. I was like,
we didn't say for 24 hours. You might say, we're saying for a short period of time because it allows for when you, it allows for when the sexual act to happen that y'all both know where to touch each other and not feel like you're in violation, right? Because sometimes in the middle of the act, you're touching and you're hearing ouches when you don't really want to hear ouches. You want to hear the same satisfaction both ways. And the only way we can do that is exploring each other's body and just really being in tune with each other. And the intimacy for most women or some women is really the things outside of the bedroom and sometimes even outside of the touch. And I joked about it earlier by pushing the vacuum cleaner, by putting the kids in the bathtub. Because now what it's doing is it's allowing me to have mental freedom. And now for me to think about the things that satisfy me. Because I'm so busy trying to satisfy everyone else that I'm putting my own needs on the back burner. So it just allows for that mental freedom, that mental space.
What about setting the mood? I mean, you go to bed, you're tired, and then it's 2 a.m., you get the wake up call, and you're like, I really wanted a full night's sleep, right? But there are so many things that we can do, I think, to set the stage for it. So even if, as a woman, I'm not really in the mood or my mind is not there, that I can do things in my environment, in my bedroom, in my home to set the stage. So what would you tell a woman who's just jumps in the bed and doesn't really set the stage? What are the kinds of things that she can do that will help her get herself there? Like if he didn't push the vacuum and he didn't whatever,
Right.
but she can prepare herself for the expectation of a romantic evening with her spouse.
I say be intentional about setting time for yourself, meaning whether that's going to get a massage, whether that's just watching your favorite TV show, whether that's listening to your own favorite playlist, whatever it might be, but setting some time to the side for yourself and not being in the hustle and bustle of everything. Because we get used to that. We get used to our to-do list. Our to-do list is our thing, but at the end of the day, we're exhausted, we're tired. So making sure that you carve out some time of your busy schedule just for yourself.
Now, see, here's the problem. Can I just tell the truth and shame the devil?
Yes, go ahead.
If I make time for myself and take the nice Calgon bath and everything, I don't want him sweating all over me. No, seriously, I think that there are so many things that we can do, even, the candles in the
Yeah, the
bedroom, the
candles.
music in the bedroom, that even signal to him that I'm excited about spending time with you. And so I think, like you said, but time and space, because it's really hard for us to take that stuff off. One of the challenges that you hear more and more today, and I think there would maybe have been a season where this question was primarily related to age and just the change in body, but also we've got medication, we've got physical challenges, is when a man is struggling with his ability to complete the act. And so when you're in that situation, whether that results in the woman being frustrated or the man being frustrated, what are we doing there? What if, I think one of the questions was just a woman that's struggling and he doesn't want to go see anybody about it. But that means she's not enjoying her sex life too. So what would you say in that case?
Well, definitely when we're talking about a male struggling with ED and not being able to have an erection for the sexual act and not wanting to receive help, that's very detrimental because it has so much of an impact on a woman, her needs not being met. So if that is happening, it's really important, again, that she talks it out. And I know you may be saying, how much talking can one do? But at some point, it's being held in and it's causing her a lot of pain on the inside. But one of the things is to find a network of people or good friends that she can talk to about these things that are happening. And in addition to that, if he is not willing to get help, that's when you actually have to bring, whether it's an elder from the church or someone that you can really trust, that they can really have a real conversation about what is going on because it's killing the marriage.
That's important. I think we look at it like, oh, we're not having sex and this bothers me. But if we've said earlier, sex is glue. And if it's an indicator of health in the relationship, then if you're not having it, it's not a zero-sum game. It is important.
And it's fixable.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
ED is not the end.
You're right.
It just means that we have to be bold and brave enough to go into the doctor's office and allow them to provide us with solutions, because there are solutions.
Okay, help somebody. Go ahead. Tell me, I'm the husband, you're the wife. How can I say to my husband, let's work on this in a way that doesn't make him feel emboldened with
Well,
shame?
definitely, we're not going to shame them. We can just let them know, hey, I love you, and I want to be connected with you. But it seemed like there's something that's stopping that. Can we go see what it is? Because I want to be connected with you. I want us to have that magic that we once had. Can we go do this together? And I think how we say it versus saying, I got needs and you're not taking care of my needs, and really putting on the defense, because our hormones start acting and we start reacting. But I think if we allow ourselves to really speak our truth, like I really want to be connected with you, and I really want us to have the fun that I know that we're capable of having. Can we go do this together?
There's so many things that, yes, talking that needs to happen and exploration that needs to happen and understanding and all of that. But I think that we know what we know until we explore. And many people have explored nothing besides missionary position before they get married. So what does it look like to explore sex beyond maybe what I know or just what I've been exposed to or maybe even what my husband and I know? We've got questions about exploring different sexual positions and what does that look like in marriage. When you brought up the good girl complex, there's a lot about that can make a lot of people feel ashamed.
Yeah.
And so how do I figure that out? Is it up to my husband to tell me what he wants to try? Is it up to me to come up with certain things? Like, how can we keep marriage and intimacy in marriage exciting without it feeling awkward and silly and I don't know what I'm doing, or without me as a wife feeling like I'm a bad girl by doing these things, or even if he's asking me to do these things? How can we do this in a healthy way?
I think check in with each other. Check in and find out, like, how are you feeling? And is this, I'm trying to say this right, one position. Most of the time when I see people come in, they're tired of the militant position, like meaning that I'm on the bottom, you're on the top. Can we explore something? So I think being able to just really have that conversation and finding out what each other like. And you say, well, what if we don't know? Then explore. They have plenty of books, different things.
That we're supposed to order off of Amazon and pray that they don't go to our neighbor's house.
Yes. The neighbors might be happy. They might look at God. They be like, look at God. Look at God. Look at God.
Oh, goodness.
But it's real. It allows us to actually explore and see what each other like, especially when we may not know. You may have two virgins that actually came together and they're like, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know how. And I think being, like, we read about everything else. We can read about how to satisfy each other in the bedroom and how to satisfy our mate. And even though we're sharing some tips now, it's not always just one universal answer for everything. We got to be willing to put in the work to identify where we're falling short in our relationship, and without even finger pointing. But wherever it is, just being real vulnerable and say, hey, I love you, you love me, what do we need to do? And if reading a book is going to help us, then I think it's a step in the right direction.
So you have two women watching this. One woman is like, okay, tonight I'm going to say to my husband, or maybe tomorrow night so I can get my mind right, but I'm going to say to my husband, okay, is there anything you want to try that we don't do? And she's like geared up for it and she's excited about it. And then you have the other woman who's like, I don't even want to do it. Don't ask me to explore any other positions. From this conversation, what, for lack of a better way to say it, what, I don't think this is the right word, but what obligation do you think a woman has and a husband has to each other to keep it spicy versus being good and being boring? Is there any kind of reason to seek out excitement beyond the norm, even if y'all are good with the routine?
When you say beyond the norm,
if we're normal, we're good, we have our routine with our sex life, and I'm just bringing up the issue of exploring sexual positions, and somebody's listening and they're going, do I have to do that? And is there a responsibility to keep things exciting, I guess is what I'm asking.
and when you said, do I have to do that? And you, and
Because that's how somebody feels right now. They're
I
just
know
like,
they
oh
do. I know they
gosh,
do. And your mate is saying, please do that.
possibly.
Then we have to get back to the point that, are we trying to meet somewhere in the middle and please each other? Because I think sometimes we have a sexless marriage because sometimes we can be selfish. And I'm not saying we as the women, it can be either party is being selfish. And if that is the case, we have to ask ourselves, how are we really showing up in this marriage? And if do we want this marriage to really work? And break down our own selfishness and being vulnerable enough and willing enough and courageous enough to meet the needs of our mate. And I didn't say the male or the female, either one, because there's something missing. And if somebody is saying, I am tired of this position, can we try something else? What's wrong with trying? And if for some reason we try a position that is that is painful, then of course we don't want to do that. We don't want one person to have pleasure and the other one to have pain. But what we want to do is find that sweet spot that both of us can be satisfied. And the way we do that is we explore, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that worked. Oh, this worked. That didn't work. And that's communicating. And not only us talking, but listening to what is being said and taking notes about what pleases our mate. Not just taking notes about what turned me on, but take some notes about what is making your mate happy. And if both are doing that, then we're going to see some sparks where probably it wasn't no fire at all.
I mean, it's just the principles of marriage in general. It's
Yeah.
that I'm not in this just for what I get out of it or what makes me happy or what
Yep.
makes me feel good. I'm in this because of what builds us up together as a
Yes.
couple. And my body doesn't belong to me, it belongs to you, and
Yes.
vice versa. And how
Yes.
can I please you in the same way that he should be asking that question?
It's funny that you say that because that's what I start with and I lead with. How if I worry about pleasing you and you worry about pleasing me, then our marriage is going to be juicy in so many different areas. And I'm not just talking about sex, but since we are talking about sex, it'll be definitely juicy in the sex.
That's so good. How do I find a therapist? Because we've talked about therapy a lot, and the issue, of course, when we're talking about pastors and pastors' wives, is just the sense of privacy. But even if they're professionals and they have to hold our thoughts and our situation in confidence, how do we find a therapist who understands our needs as ministers? Because there is even if things are held in confidence, there is an understanding of how we're operating in our space. And so how do you go about finding a therapist who gets that?
Yeah. So nowadays it's so easy to go online, like places like Psychology Today, BetterHelp, and each directory have different profiles, and the profiles will let you know the clinician's background, whether there's any, if they're a Christian, if they specialize in sex therapy, if they specialize in relationships. So you have the bio at your fingertips, and it allows for you to vet them before you actually go to them. So, yeah.
If you had to say what is the most frequently asked question you get related to sex and marriage, what is that?
One of the most frequent question is, why do I have to do it? No, seriously, like why can't we just do everything else but that? And that comes from not being pleased. So the question is like, why does this even have to be, or why do we even have to have sex? We're old now. Why does it have to continue? So that's the big question, why?
And when they ask that question, when she or he, I'm assuming it's mostly she, but she or he asks that question, your response is
Why not? Like, why not? Why shouldn't it happen? And there's a story behind the reason why we move and act the way we act. So hearing that story, because I find that if there's any abuse prior to the marriage, I find that sometimes women can't have sex, and it's not even anything about their mate. It's about the trauma.
right. It's a
that they're-
PTSD every single
Yes,
time.
it's the trauma. And your mate may put on this real nice cologne, and when they come into the room, it shuts everything down because that same cologne was the cologne that traumatized. So really get into the story, and that's where the healing, there's a story for why we say our yeses and why we say our nos, and really getting to understand what that story is, because it's healing after that.
It's so good. This is so good. And I feel like, this is the beginning of a conversation that could go on and on and on and on. And for every question we've asked, there's a nuance in that question for a specific wife, a specific husband, and a specific marriage. But I hope that what has been clear as we've talked tonight is that that sex and marriage is worth prioritizing. It is worth fighting for. It is worth working at. It is worth talking about. It is worth reducing the shame and whatever you have to do that. It is worth understanding the importance of sex as glue in marriage and how good it can be, but how sometimes getting there can require some work.
Yes.
But isn't it how the saying goes that anything that's worth having requires effort? So I think that while for every one topic that we've had, there's probably 8 different shades and different situations. And one of the reasons why the marriage bed is undefiled is because it's the only place where those two people will meet in that way. And so there is work that you have to do as a wife, pastor's wife or not, as a wife, as your husband has to do, to fight for that space in your marriage. And you'll have to fight for that space through the ebbs and flows and the different seasons of your marriage, before you have kids, when you have babies, when the kids are gone, empty nesters, as you mature and move through the seasons of life, in seasons where you're tired, in seasons where you can't get enough, in seasons where his libido is high, in seasons where your libido is high. But isn't that the whole point of marriage? That in the seasons of life, you change, I change, all God's children change, but we stay committed to each other and we fight to make our marriage good. So my hope is that tonight you have been encouraged to, in a general sense and in a very specific sense, to fight for your marriage and to do the work that it takes for you. And you can only control you, but you can sure invite your husband to join you at the table. To let him know that you love him, that you see him, and that you want connection and intimacy of all kinds in your marriage. But to do what it takes to figure that out, whether you have to go to the doctor and ask some questions about your physiology, whether you have to go to a trusted friend to talk about some of the struggles, whether you see a therapist, or whether you just look your husband straight in the eye and say, listen, I really want to improve our marriage in every area, but especially this area. And if, even though you feel weird to do the sensei touch thing and invite him to do that, I feel like somebody's husband is going to be like, you want me to what? but the thing is, we spend so much time before marriage being told not to think about it. And then we get in marriage and have all the freedom in the world, and then we don't want to try stuff. You're a married woman, whether you're 20 or whether you're 70, try stuff and understand that it's a beautiful thing to have that safe space with your spouse. If it has not been a safe place because of infidelity or pornography or just general levels of trustworthiness, then it's a space worth working for. And so, again, I know that for every question we've asked, there are 8 flavors of that question that could have gone around the room, and every marriage is different. We hope that we've given you some practical tools that will aid you as you work to build intimacy in your marriage. And nothing, including sex, is above the concern of Christ. He sits at the right hand of the Father. Yes, he's talking to the Father about your health. He's talking to the Father about your kids. He's talking to the Father about your mind. And if you're concerned about your sex life in your marriage, Jesus can talk to the Father about that too. Even this is not outside of what you can take to the Lord in prayer to give you guidance and wisdom as the Holy Spirit lives in you. So this is not some separate issue that you talk about or you go to counseling for and you don't take to Jesus. You can take this to Jesus too. Our hope is that it's been practical, that it's been informative, and that if nothing else, it's broken the ice for you to begin to have these conversations in safe places, especially with your spouse. As you already know, the Pastor's Wives Ministry, Mom has always been so intentional about wanting to create spaces for women to be equipped, educated, empowered, and to walk away from those spaces feeling like, okay, I learned something and I can do something with this. But in addition to that, wanting to make sure that that you're able to ongoingly receive practical input. And this is just one of the ways we do that. So my hope is that you've enjoyed the conversation tonight, but more than that, that you would connect or stay connected in very real ways to this ministry. I want to tell you a little bit more about it. We want to continue the conversation, and we always do. I'm curious now to see what's going to happen in the Facebook group after this conversation tonight. It might be on and popping. LoisEvans.org/Facebook group. I mean, this might be the time. This might be the time where some of those books that we don't know exist, that they might get shared. Here, read this. It helped my marriage. You might want to join the Facebook group after tonight. I also want you to continue to submit your questions, and you can do that by going to LoisEvans.org/questions, because there's a team of pastors' wives who understand this important issue in marriage, and they will be answering questions and sharing their wisdom and insight. There are other helpful resources and topics that we want to share with you. And so because you registered to join us tonight, we want to make sure that you are resourced. And there'll be an email that you'll be getting soon with additional resources. If you found your way here and you didn't register, you can do that by going to LoisEvans.org/After Dark. Because again, we want to make sure whether it's a book or whether it's a podcast that you are resourced. Now, there are two other things that we want to make sure you receive. One is, if you're a pastor's wife, to receive the newsletter that we have for you. You can get that by going to LoisEvans.org/newsletter. There is also, from the Urban Alternative, a devotional that goes up once a month to any woman who signs up to receive it. And so if you're a pastor's wife and want to receive it for yourself, or maybe you're a pastor's wife and want to, beyond the pastor's wives newsletter, have something that you can share with the women at your church, that devotional can be found at tonyevans.org/women. So LoisEvans.org/newsletter, tonyevans.org/women. The last thing that I'm really excited to remind you about is tomorrow is Mom's birthday. December the 1st, 12/1 is her birthday. And obviously, as a family, we'll be thinking about her tomorrow. But we started this when she passed away. We asked that as we celebrated and all these flowers were coming to our church for her funeral, we said, give some flowers to your pastor's wife. And every year we've been doing that since, and this year is no different. So if you are watching and you are not a pastor's wife, but you know who your pastor's wife is, and you want to make sure she feels special, well, it's not too late. Simply call up a florist in your area or go get some flowers from Tom Thumb or Costco and just make sure they land on her doorstep to let her know that you're thinking about her. If you are a pastor's wife and maybe not the senior pastor's wife, you can give flowers to your senior pastor's wife. Maybe you're the senior pastor's wife and want to honor some of the wives of the ministers on your staff. It is a day to make sure that the pastor's wife, who is often an unsung hero, who's doing a million things behind the scenes and probably has held every position on the team and on the staff until the church grew and other people could do it, that she's seen and remembered. And it's so important to do that. And we pray that for December the 1st, that you would indeed remember your pastor's wife as we remember our mother. Again, we pray that this has been useful, that it sparked some conversation, but more than anything, that it's brought this conversation to the top level so that you are able to focus on a very important and wonderful part of marriage. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will keep you in the news with the next thing that we have coming. We'll see you soon.